What's up, everybody? Joe Brown here. This is the Heresy Financial Show, and we are talking about China and the fact that they are currently discussing how to make sure that they are not subject to the painful sanctions that Russia is going through right now. They are talking about this. This is something that many people expected. This is going to be something they're going to try and insulate themselves from because they have long-term goals that may be at odds with the United States' long-term goals, and they don't want to have to go through the same thing that they see Russia going through right now. Ready? Let's dive in. So China has been meeting with its banks to discuss protecting its assets from U.S. sanctions. Take a look with me at this Financial Times article that details that officials are concerned that measures that are being taken against Moscow could also be applied to Beijing. This is something that it is logical for them to be concerned about here. So they held an emergency meeting with their domestic and foreign banks to discuss how they could protect their overseas assets from sanctions similar to the ones that are imposed on Russia for its invasion of Ukraine. This is what I've been saying for a couple of months now. Every single country on earth is looking at what is happening with Russia right now, and regardless of whether they agree with it, disagree with it, whether they agree with the way the world has responded or disagree with the way the world has responded, everybody is looking at this and thinking, I don't want that to happen to me. So everybody, whether it's public like China right now, or whether it's in private, is meeting and thinking about and planning for, we need to make sure that we are not in the same position, that if push comes to shove, we don't have to worry about getting sanctioned by the US. And as a side note, as a US citizen, probably the only group of people who are not worried about this are U.S. citizens, which is ironic considering because of the Patriot Act, the United States government has had the ability to sanction U.S. citizens for decades now. Every single U.S. citizen is at risk of the United States sanctioning them. And it wouldn't be called sanctions, but your assets would be seized or frozen. Your transactions wouldn't be able to go through. You wouldn't be able to access your funds, your bank accounts, your brokerage accounts. They have that power if push comes to shove. And whether it's just used against criminals or in some dystopian future, it's used against everybody for totalitarian control, the very ability for that to happen is what's dangerous. Not the way that the power is used, the existence of the very power itself is what's dangerous. Get some wealth outside of the financial system while you still can, because someday it might be too late. Buy Bitcoin, buy physical gold, buy physical silver, get some assets in other countries, diversify. It's very easy to do this, very low minimums. You don't have to be rich at all. You can do this with many different apps and programs and software and accounts and companies with sometimes a minimum of $5. So get some assets and some wealth outside the system while you still can. Okay, back to China. So Xi's administration has been alarmed because of what's been happening with Russia, and they said they got put on alert that the U.S. had the ability to freeze the Russian central bank's dollar assets. Now, the officials and the attendees did not mention specific scenarios, but this article is stating the Chinese invasion or takeover of Taiwan could be a trigger. Now, if you have never read Ray Dalio's book called Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order, came out within the last couple of months. I just recently finished reading it again, read it twice now. It's a fantastic book. I highly recommend that. In addition to that book, I recommend Graham Allison's Destined for War, Can China and America Escape Thucydides' Trap? There are dynamics at play that have been unfolding for decades that are very similar to things that have happened many, many times throughout history, where U.S. as a reigning power and China as a rising power are coming at the conflict is developing between the two. And it does not have to end badly. There have been a few times over the last few hundred years where similar dynamics have been resolved peacefully. But that doesn't mean that the conflict isn't growing right now. And Taiwan is probably the number one hot fuse that could trigger catastrophic things happening, especially between the two countries. This is especially true considering Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the fact that over half of the world's supply of neon comes out of Ukraine. And neon is a vital ingredient necessary for the lasers that produce semiconductors. So Russia is in control now of a massive bottleneck in terms of semiconductors globally. Taiwan as well. And so between these two, Taiwan is arguably more important now than ever. But it's not all bad news. There are a lot of forces that are keeping conflict away from happening between China and America simply because there's such a mutually beneficial relationship between China and America right now, and having something come in between that would be mutually disastrous. If we take a look here, we can see China's holdings of U.S. treasuries. Absolutely massive. Now, we've got some different numbers going on here because I know Japan is considered the largest external holder of U.S. treasuries, 1.3 trillion. This is saying that China holds more than 1.5 trillion of U.S. securities. I believe this is because this is counting actors other than the PBOC, the central bank, and I think this chart here from Statista is only counting central bank holdings. Either way, China holds a massive amount of U.S. treasuries. This is a massively mutually beneficial relationship because China has been funding United States deficits, largely them in Japan. Massive amounts of funding for United States deficits have come from China and Japan. So this is very beneficial to the United States government to be able to spend the money on the things that it wants to spend on, which ironically includes military and our military presence in the South China Sea, which Japan and China are partially funding, which is kind of ironic. But either way, massively beneficial for the United States. And considering that we have a massive trade deficit, and we buy most of our stuff from the biggest exporter on earth, which is China, massively mutual beneficial relationship there. So China holds a ton of U.S. debt that is beneficial to the United States, and in return, we buy a lot of stuff from China. So cash is flooding in to China's borders. They're being able to use this to buy up long-term assets and build up infrastructure and increase their GDP. Massively mutual beneficial relationship going on here. And if something were to come in between that, it would be very, very detrimental to both parties. So a deterioration between the U.S. and China relationship is something that is definitely worth hedging for and worth being aware of and worth protecting yourself against. It is not something that is set in stone, not a definite or a for sure future. But what is certain is that everywhere on earth right now, every country and every person as well should be worrying about making sure you're protecting yourself against sanctions, whether you're an individual, a company, or a country, making sure you have as much sovereignty over your own financial destiny as possible. As always, I really appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.